I can't stress how important it is for the executive director and board chair to have a solid relationship. It doesn't mean they need to agree on everything, but they just have to. It's almost like they become best friends, right? And the trust between the two is just really, really, really important. And they also have to be on the same page. Now, being on the same page doesn't mean they just agree all of the time, because I don't think that's healthy either. But they do need to be connected. They really need to be in regular communication and collaborate. And I'm talking about 1, 2, 3 calls a week, whether they're formal or informal, getting together once or twice a month before, during, or after a board meeting, just again to make sure that they're on the same page and they're connected. The chemistry between the two is just really important as well. People will feed off of that chemistry, whether it's the staff or the other board, and that chemistry just really helps them to stay connected. And the key to the chemistry, again, and we're talking a lot about communicating, and Janie, prior to the meeting, we were talking about the Wadsworth schools, and one of the things that you talked about was what a great job Andy Hill is doing communicating. I don't think an executive director and a board chair can communicate enough. So you're going to hear communicate a lot. The staff and the board sees how well the executive director and the board chair relate to each other. And that will either help or that will hurt the organization. And because when they're not on the same page, and we'll talk about it a little bit, it can create drama in the board, which is never a good thing, or it can create drama in the agency, which isn't a good thing. And so that relationship is really important. And the key to a good relationship, as we all know, is respect for each other, and the ability to cooperate. And it has to be professional. Again, trust. I'm big on trust, and in organizations and relationships that I've had with executive directors. So important for me to trust them, and for them to trust me, that we'll always try and do the right thing. Because at the end of the day, we're both on the same page, and we both want what's best for the organization, without having any agenda. And the last bullet point on that slide is, it just takes time, and it takes effort, and it takes communication to make the relationship strong and productive. And one of the ways I've seen board chairs not do a good job for the organization is they just don't invest the right amount of time to be successful. Leadership Medina County would be a good example, right? The Wadsworth Chamber would be a good example. You got Colleen and you got Janie, who are both great executive directors, and it would be really, really easy for an incoming board chair to say, "Hey, cool, I got it made. I'm going to do this for a year, and I'm going to put it on my resume, and I'm going to let Colleen do her thing, and I'll kind of follow along the way, and that'll work, and the organization will have a good year because of the executive director." But you just wonder what else they could have done by working together, investing the time and the effort to be strong and to be productive. So just can't communicate enough. I can't stress the communication piece between the executive director and the board chair, and also the trust that both people will operate with a sense of good for the organization.
I think those are so great points, Ron. I think one of the biggest challenges right now, though, is, with COVID-19 and not being able to get together face to face like we used to, it's just so challenging to get that time in, So I was glad you mentioned the phone calls and different things. I think there are ways to keep working around it, but it is harder than it
Yeah,
used to be.
it is, and I think, Colleen, both sides have to be intentional, right? I mean, especially I think if you're coming in as a board chair, just really, really important to, set up a weekly conversation on the calendar, right? Because it's easy to say, hey, I'm going to call Colleen this week and we're going to connect and talk. But I don't think if you're intentional and you don't take it seriously, it'll be 2 weeks or 3 weeks. So Terry or Colleen, thanks for moving the slide. So let's talk a little bit about board members, because while the relationship between an executive director and the board chairperson is important, having the right board in place goes a long way to having some success. And I've got some bullet points there to talk about. Sometimes I've been part of boards and I've seen this where the board really wants to get involved in the day-to-day operations and tell people what to do. And, at the end of the day, the board serves with the board chair and provides guidance and direction. You've hired an executive director to let them run the organization, and a board needs to let them do that. And I think boards that kind of cross that line and meddle are boards and organizations that get in trouble. I've seen it, and it's not healthy. I've seen it ruin an organization, believe it or not. And I won't go into details where the board just kind of took over and did some wrong things and some bad things, and that organization isn't even around today, which is just awful. If you're a board member, you have to have a strong commitment and belief in the cause of the organization. And I think most board members know that and understand that. Unfortunately, you have some board members that don't, and they join a board because they feel like it'll be good for their resume, or their employer saying to them, hey, you got to get on a board. I would just say, if you're an executive director or a board chair, just please recruit people that strongly believe in what you're doing. And I think one of the biggest responsibilities I felt like I had as a board chairperson was when I left to have a board that was better than when I started. Now that's hard because I joined some boards that were really good. So if they were really good, it would be, let's keep this board as good as it is. But anytime you had a board member leave, I mean, for me, it's okay. Well, that person was really good. Who can we find that's better? Because if you got the right board in place as an executive director and a board chairperson, you're going to be able to move mountains, and you're going to be able to get a lot of things done. And so that commitment piece is important. As a board member, both on the personal side and on the business side, you gotta use the resources that you have in place to move the mission of the organization along. And those resources come in a variety of ways. We talk a lot about time and talent and treasure. There's just a number of ways that you can do that. But when you join a board and you're recruiting board members, you just have to make sure that they understand that one of the things that you're going to do, or you're going to ask them to do, is to leverage the resources they have, whether personal, whether professional, maybe both, to help. Innovation and forward thinking is just so important, gosh. And I think we've seen that firsthand this year in terms of what we've all had to go through as we've tried to lead organizations. you got to think big. I just challenge any executive director or board chair person or board member to think big, to think what is impossible, to challenge the norm. I think where I've seen organizations not be as effective or efficient is when you become executive director or you become a board chairperson of an organization that historically has done really well. And so you come on board and you say, hey, I'm not going to change a thing, right? This organization's doing great, and I don't think we need to change a thing, and we just need to maintain the status quo. If you're not careful and you do that, your organization doesn't grow. And quite honestly, you'll have other organizations in the city or in the county begin to pass you by because they are thinking differently. They are challenging the norm. They are forward thinking. And that's just really, really important. My next bullet point, you know, kind of ties into the first one. Again, from a board perspective, you know, the ask is really to be strategic versus operational. You have an executive director in place that will handle things on a day-to-day basis and handle the operations of the organization. As a board member, you need to help that person think strategically, because sometimes executive directors can kind of lock in right here and not think out of the box or not think about how to get from point A to point B. And quite honestly, they just may not know how. And a board member needs to help them with that strategic piece to help get them where they want to be. And last but not least, you know, there's a fiduciary responsibility that we all have, executive director, board person, and chairman. And you just got to take that serious. I mean, balancing the budget and making the tough decisions. And I mean, that comes with that job. And sometimes that's not fun. We've all been part of that. And sometimes you've got to make some tough decisions along the way. And you just have to be willing to do the right thing, because depending on the board that you're on and depending on the organization, you know, that piece of it is just really, really important. And you've got to take that fiduciary responsibility really, really serious. For the board chair, you know, at the end of the day, it's all about governance for that board chair. And it's just really important for the chairperson to understand that at the end of the day, they got responsibilities to the executive director and to the board. They've got to be engaged in that. You know, again, I apologize because this now comes in the second or third slide, but it's just not about being involved in the day-to-day operations and the politics within the organization. You know, let the executive director do that. I think when board chairs sway from that, the staff and the board sometimes gets confused in terms of who at the end of the day is really running the organization. And at the end of the day, the executive director is running the organization, and the executive director needs to take the bull by the horns and do that. You know, one of the things the board chair has to do, whether through its bylaws or, you know, through its history, is just making sure that the executive director and their staff, you know, is keeping with the mission of the organization, the direction, and the priorities. You know, keeping them focused on the work that needs to be done, and continuing to move the organization forward. And last but not least, I mean, just it's really important for the board chair to give guidance and support to the executive director, and just to be there for them in good times and in bad. And not only, I mean, not always just telling them what to do, but just being a good listener and being a safe place for them to come and vent and to open up about what's going on and where they need help. So, Colleen, I'm sure I missed some things along the way, but I'd love for you to chime in anywhere there that you think is important.
I think you did a lot of great stuff there, and I appreciate that so much. all of the things that you covered for sure. And I think that we can probably move into some Q&A. I know that Terry has some questions for us, and I think that'll help us cover some of those other topics. And then we're gonna open it up and see what questions people have. I noticed we don't have any questions yet in chat box, so I know Terry's going to prod you to put some questions in the chat box if you have some questions for Ron and I. And Terry, I'll hand it back over to you.
You're right. I was going to remind everybody, if you have any questions, be sure to put them in the chat box. So thank you, Colleen. But like I said, Ron and Colleen have put some questions together, some pointed questions that can kind of help further elaborate on this relationship between the board chairperson, and then the executive director. So Ron and Colleen, can you speak to us about how to handle disagreements on your board as a chairperson and as an executive director? So disagreements, when people don't get along.
Does that happen?
Well, and actually one of the things too, what if you don't have disagreements? What if there are none when you know?
That's right. Colin, you want to start or you want me to start?
I mean, no disagreements. That's a little bit of a bad sign, I'd say.
Yeah.
I mean, there are times definitely where everybody's going to agree, but there's going to be times, there should be times when there are different opinions. And that's why you brought those individuals onto your board, to have a variety of opinions and backgrounds about things and perspectives so that the board can think as a whole. But the board has to speak as one voice. And so when there's a disagreement, even if the board makes a decision that not everyone agrees with, when the board's out in public, they have to speak as one voice and say, this was the decision we made. Oftentimes a mistake that happens in the board when a decision's made is that people will go out into the public and say, well, I didn't agree with that. And that can cause division, not only for that board, but also for that organization. So it's something to be very careful about as a board, and to put a lot of thought into it. As an executive director, when the board has a disagreement, that is for the chair and the board to work on. The board governs itself. The executive director does not govern the board.
Yeah, Jenny, what a great point about locking arms as a board, because as any organization moves through a year, there are going to be some speed bumps along the way, and there's going to be some tough decisions along the way. And hey, I got to tell you, robust conversation in a board meeting is healthy, as long as it's respectful. But as part of being a board member or an executive director, when you make a decision as a board, it is the organization's decision and you move forward. Jenny, I've even seen where, the executive director, the board makes a decision that the executive director doesn't like. And Colleen, the executive director goes off and says, hey, my board did this. This was, I don't like this. It wasn't my idea, but my board did this. That's not a good look either. I've got some really, through the years, I've had the opportunity to serve with so many people on so many different boards. And, we talk about disagreements and the like. One of my favorite board members of all time is Mark Dorman. I don't know if anybody knows Mark Dorman. I'm sure you do, unfortunately. I say that as a joke because Mark and I are actually really good friends. Mark and I served on a number of boards together, and most notably the Port Authority. And when we were putting our fiber project together, we hit some speed bumps along the way, and we had some pretty contentious board meetings. And Mark was always really good about being contentious. And if you don't know Mark also has a big ego, and so he's always right. And so one of the things that I had to do as the board chairperson was a couple of things. Not allow that to always dominate the meeting, and make sure that you spend the right amount of time in that space, because sometimes you're not always going to be able to come to a decision. And it's okay to say, time out, let's think about this some more and let's go and let's revisit it. And one of the things I would do as a board chair with Mark is we'd follow up the next day or the next week and just talk. And I would get, which is, again, I'm picking on Mark, but I'd get myself and Mark and somebody from the other side together and say, hey, let's the three of us get together and just really vet this through and try to find some common ground that we think is the right way to go, so that when we come back together, we can be more on the same page. And so, one of the things a board chair has to do is be a mediator as well, whether it's in the meeting or outside of the meeting, because you can't have too much of that either, because if it becomes too contentious, you have board members who quit or leave or don't advocate or are negative in the community, and that's not healthy for the organization either. I think it's always good on a board to have a yeah but person as well. And so I've had the opportunity to serve on a number of boards with Bob Bucks as well. And if you ever served on a board with Bob Bucks, he is the king of yeah but, and I have found that to be very healthy on a board as well, because usually when Bob would say, yeah, but, other board members were thinking the same thing, but just didn't have the courage to say it. And when you've got that, yeah, but, so when you're talking about recruiting board members, finding some yeah, but board members, I think is really, really good, because it keeps you honest. And because I had a ton of respect for Bob, when Bob would say, yeah, but, it would give me hey, Ron, you better pause there and you better think about that a little bit and listen to what he's saying.
Yep. Okay, great. And I know Colleen, I mean, we've gone through 3 or 4 board trainings now, and it has come up too that Colleen has been, with her board chair, very purposeful and with her board in terms of selecting people with different strengths. For those of you who've gone through Leadership Medina County, you've got the dolphins and the foxes and the beavers and the owls. And so she purposely, with her board, will select people from those different strengths areas to serve on her board, because it gives her varying perspectives. So I think that's great advice.
It is. That's great, Terry. And it gives you the right balance too on the board, which is perfect.
Yep. Colleen likes the yeah, but people too.
Is that because she's a yeah, but person, or is that because?
I don't know. I'll let Colleen answer that.
All right.
I do like the yeah buts. I do like to hear the different perspectives.
Yeah.
Because, I want to uncover anything. I feel like when we talk about things and we dream about things in the board, I want to make sure that we're thinking it through completely. I don't want to get out of there and then start implementing something and then find the yeah but outside of the boardroom. I'd rather do the yeah but in the boardroom.
Yep.
I think any executive director would say that. You don't want to find out later, and just get yourself in the middle of a situation that you don't want to be in. So you have to look at the yeah buts as positive people, and take that as a great opportunity to protect the organization.
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, so let's see here. We've got a question here, but then there was also a question in the chat box that kind of feeds into this. So in theory, how often, I've got 3 questions here. How often should the executive director and board chairperson meet? How often should the executive committee meet? And then how often should the board itself meet?
I think, Ron, you touched on this already about, just touching base 2 or 3 times a week, by phone, and then, a few times a month if you can. Otherwise, in non-COVID times. Our executive committee for Leadership Medina County only meets 4 times a year, and our board meets 4 times a year. And I guess it would just depend upon what business your organization needs to accomplish that the board needs oversight on. And our board, can meet more regularly if needed, to talk about things, to brainstorm, to do some strategic thinking, as Ron was talking about, in case of an emergency, or et cetera. But I think each organization has their set times, or they're supposed to meet, that's in the code of regulations that they have, that the Ohio Revised Codes, actually says that you have to have a code of regulations. So you have this code of regulations, and in there it should set when those meetings are.
Yeah, I do think every organization is a little bit different. So the frequency of the communication between the executive director, the board, and the executive committee, I think is a little bit different. I will tell you, for me as a board chair, I would always try and connect with the executive director at least once a week. Just to check in and make sure they were doing okay and to see if they needed anything. And it could be formal or it could be informal. And it could be a 2-minute conversation or it could be a 30-minute conversation. I think the executive committee aspect of an organization is an important one as well, because you can get a lot of work done in an executive committee. And the executive committee can come to the board with their recommendations, and what happens is, so a couple of things. One, when you got a good executive committee that can come to the board and make recommendations, it allows for more time for the board to be strategic and forward thinking and be big picture, versus getting caught up in some of the other stuff that a board has to deal with. Now, that doesn't mean the executive committee runs the board or speaks for the board, because they're just trying to help the board be more efficient. And, I would think that 80% of the time, whatever the executive committee would bring forward, the board would probably be supportive of. And that 20% will allow for further conversation. But again, one of the things we're talking about here is being forward thinking, being strategic, staying in your lanes. At the end of the day, you want the board to spend their time doing those kinds of things and thinking outside of the box, and how do we challenge the norm, and how do we take the next step as an organization. And so I can't stress enough how important I think having a good executive committee that meets, the executive committee, again, depending on the organization, but they should be getting together probably at least once a month, for sure.
So since we're talking about board meeting, one of the questions that came up in the chat box is how long should meetings be, board meetings?
So I come from the school of George Patus. So some of you know George Patus and some of you don't. George was the king of the 15-minute board meeting. So now I'm half joking and half serious, but I tell you what, ideally, I don't think a board meeting should go longer than 60 to 90 minutes. Because again, if you're doing good work in your committees and on your executive committee, and you're using your board again to help you to be strategic and forward thinking and big picture, I think 45 to 90 minutes for a board meeting is the right amount of time. Colleen, I don't know what you think about that, but that's kind of where I'm at.
I think absolutely, unless there's an emergency situation to talk about, and then that, but on a normal board meeting time, I think an hour to an hour and a half. We have had longer meetings, obviously, with leadership in Medina County, but that was more along the lines of updating our code of regulations and other things. And sometimes that does take a little bit of extra work, even though you have committees working on those things.
Yeah.
So just realize that when you are, doing updates and things, you may have a period of time where the board meetings are longer. As a chair, I would just encourage the chairs to make sure you communicate that to your board members. Here's what time you're going to need to commit this year because we're doing this.
Yeah.
and then having a plan. One thing that Klaus set up for us last year as the board president was a plan for the agenda for the whole year. so that the board in advance knew what are we going to accomplish this year, and what are those things, what kind of education are we going to have at each board meeting, what things do we need to review and approve during the board meetings, and that way the board knows in advance, here's what we're going to do. And I thought that was a really great idea, to have a little spreadsheet that you could look at and say, okay, here's what's going on. Here are the main committees. Here's finance. Here's the executive committee. Here's the full board and all their contact information on one piece of paper. It's like the master plan for the year. And that was extremely helpful in keeping the meetings on time and accomplishing what we needed to accomplish.
Yeah, I think if you get past that 90-minute period, everybody is busy. They got a lot going on. They're checking their phones. I mean, and the quality of the meeting, I think, suffers the longer that you go.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about board evaluations and executive director evaluations. So how often should the board evaluate the executive director? And then how often should the board evaluate themselves? Can you speak to that?
I'll be happy to, because I think I've got a lot of passion around this, because I think it's super important. At a minimum, the board should evaluate itself, and the board should evaluate its executive director on an annual basis. And it needs to be formal, right? We all have our businesses and our organizations, and most organizations at the end of the year have a performance review, and they speak to how that person has done. And if they've done well, hey, you celebrate, right? They get a good score. You thank them for everything. You feel good. If they haven't done as well as you would like, it allows you to sit down in a very formal way and talk about their performance. And if the executive director isn't doing everything that you would want them to do, you just kind of put them on notice. Hey, great job here, here, and here. As we turn the page to 2021, I really need you to focus on this and this. And we need to get better there. When I was president of Leadership Medina County, I worked with Lucy Sondels, and Lucy hated the numbers. She didn't know them. She didn't understand them. She didn't like them. She wanted somebody else to do them. Well, guess who gave the financial report at Leadership Medina County at every board meeting? Lucy Sondels, because she needed to do that. She needed to know that and understand. And Lucy did a great job as executive director. But I use that as an example. And also, I will say, for the executive director, I think it's really important for them to understand what the board wants them to do, right? So how will you define if I am doing a good job? Well, having a job description with specific things to do allows them to know what to do, so they know what they're going to be evaluated on. And then, and quite honestly, I think there needs to be some type of, I say once or twice, I think a mid-year check-in with the executive director. That doesn't have to be as formal, but just, hey, we're 6 months into the year. These are your major responsibilities that you have. How are we doing? How do you feel like you're doing? Let me tell you how I think you're doing, so that we can position ourselves for the second half. I think that board evaluation is important as well. I've been part of boards where we do board evaluations, and I think it's healthy for the board to share how they think they're doing, how effective they think they're doing. What do we think we're missing? So I kind of ramble there, Colleen, but I think those evaluations are really, really important.
I agree with you, Ron. They are really important. They have to happen every year. Terry will be sharing with you some resources from me later, and I do recommend a board governance book, and it does talk about doing that board self-evaluation and the executive director's evaluation every year. And it's just so helpful to move the organization forward. It's a great reminder to board members about how they should be involved and what their responsibilities are, and kind of encourages them to continue to do the work they're supposed to do as a board member. And as an executive director, I really need to know, what does my board expect from me? If I don't have any understanding of what they're going to evaluate me on, then it makes it very difficult for me to do my job effectively. So under board governance, they have something called an ends policy, and the ends policy is what the organization is supposed to accomplish. And so my board evaluates me against those things. So Leadership Medina County has 4 ends policies, and I can look at those every day, and I can look at those every time I send a board report in, and I can tell the board, here's what I've done to accomplish these things. Here's what I've done to meet these goals. And that's what I share at the board meetings. That's what I share with my board chair. And that's what my eyes are focused on. You know, I got it above my desk. You know, here's what I'm supposed to be focusing on. Here's, if it doesn't fit into here, it's not something that I need to be working on, because it's easy to have mission creep and to go off into different directions. As an executive director, I have lots of people coming to me all the time with ideas and things that we should be doing, but I've got to keep a focus and keep it steered in the right direction.
Okay, we have a couple of questions here in the chat box. So in relationship to what you just discussed. So Ron, Ed wants to know, what is your view on rewarding or compensating an executive director beyond the traditional means of a base salary and health benefits?
So I'm a huge fan of Ed's as well. So I'm sure he's got the good answer to this question as well. But hey, I am all for that. In terms of going outside of the box to reward an executive director for a job well done. And so, Ed, I don't know if you're talking about like incentive per se, but you know what, if you put together a plan for an executive director, and in that plan, it asks for them to grow the net membership of the organization. And we say, hey, you know, we're starting the year with 100 members, and we want you to grow to 105. That's one of your major responsibilities. If they do 110 or 115 or 120, and as a result, dues and revenues go like this, they should be rewarded for that. In my opinion, they've gone above and beyond what we've asked them to do. And rather than just give them a 5 in their review on a scale of 1 to 5, reward them for a job well done. I'm a fan. Ed, are you talking about kind of like incentive and things like that?
Absolutely, spot on. Can you hear
Yeah.
me? Okay.
Yeah. I mean, we've done that. I've been part of boards where we've done that with executive directors.
Yes.
So I mean, share the wealth, right? I mean, if they're doing more than you expect them to do, rather than pat them on the back and say good job, I mean, you know, share that with them.
Thank you.
Yep. Uh-oh, Terry, you're on mute.
Oops, thank you.
That usually happens to me.
I actually clicked it, it just didn't click. So, but I am going to go to the chat box because there's a couple questions in here. We have a few more panel questions, but we're at 8:52. So I want to make sure that the folks that are here get their questions answered in case they have to drop off. And then if anybody wants to stick around, we can go through these other questions that we have too. So, so one of the questions here in the chat box is, after making a board decision that is contentious, what is the best way to move forward and find that one voice again? That's a good question.
I think the key is communication, Terry. Just, I mean, you know, so if it's contentious, that means some people got what they wanted and some people didn't, right? And so I think the board chair and the executive director have to spend time with the board members who felt like they didn't get their way, and to sit down and let them know that their view is important and it was valued and it was considered. I think you just got to spend some time with them and put your arm around them, because, you know, you've got to agree to disagree, right? And so if everybody agreed about everything, boy, life would be pretty good. It just doesn't happen that way. And I was gonna say you got to hug them, and we're not allowed to do that anymore. But you got to put your arm around them and tell them how important you are and how much you respect them and how much you value them. And I know you're disappointed in the decision, but let's think about the other 90% of the things that we do really, really well. And I think you have to be honest with them and tell them, hey, hold me accountable to the decision. Right? And if it ends up being the wrong decision for the organization, you have my word in 30 days or 60 days or 90 days, we'll revisit it. And if you were right and the board was wrong, we'll acknowledge that. And I'm, I think you got to be willing to make a mistake along the way. And those are, but at the same time, as part of that conversation, to Colleen's point of earlier about locking arms, I think you got to also say to them, hey, we need your support going forward on this, though, as well, as a board member of this organization, because it can be really unhealthy for us if you're not. So that's a great question.
I agree with you, Ron. I mean, we live in such a small community in Medina County, and it is important that the board locks arms. And I think you're so right about, just following up with that person and letting them know that their voice was heard and affirming the importance of having a differing opinion on the board. That even though they were outvoted on that particular point, that it's still very valuable. I agree.
Yeah, it's not that they were wrong, right? Because who knows, right? When you make a decision, you don't know for sure if you made the right decision or the wrong decision. So the wrong thing to do is say, hey, board member, I was right, you were wrong, and just, deal with it, right? We don't know for sure. And you just need to let them know that their voice was heard and it's respected, and, so.
All right, here's another question from the chat box. Could you discuss, I like this question. Could you discuss how to handle non-active board members? For example, how to kick them into gear?
Yeah, I'll take that one, Colleen. Because you've had that. Just for the record, before I go on, I would like to. Are we recording this or no? We are. Just for the record, Mark Dorman was always wrong and I was always right. If we can just get okay. So, I think you got to call them out. Point blank. And if they're missing meetings, or this falls on the board chair, this is not the job of the executive director, in my opinion. If you've got a board member who is not coming to meetings or not doing what they're supposed to do, as a board chair, you need to proactively go see them. That happens for a number of reasons too. It doesn't mean they're a bad person, right? Something might have changed in their job. Something might have changed in their family. They might be dealing with a tough situation. And many times when people get in bad places, they're not good at putting their hand up and say, I'm having a hard time or I need some help, because they're afraid you're not going to be sensitive or you're just going to kick them off the board or do this or do that. I think a board chair, once they get a sense that there's a problem with a board member, needs to go see them. And they need to set up some time together, whether it's virtual or in person in the world that we live in, and say, hey, you've missed the last 2 meetings, or you've missed 3 of the last 4 meetings. I get a sense that something's up, what's going on. Let me remind you what we want, need, and expect from a board member. And I just need to know if you are in a position to continue to live up to this commitment or not. And if you're not, that's okay. If something's going on, let's take a leave, right? And when things are better, we can look to bring you back. But I think you got to nip that in the bud early, because if you don't, it creates a lot of frustration, I think, amongst the board as well, and some resentment can build up. I think you got to nail that early, and I think it's the board chairperson's role and responsibility to call that person out.
All right, good answer. So we have about 3 more questions here, one in the chat box and then a few that we have here, but if you have to drop off, that's fine. It's 8:59, but if you're able to stay on, I know we've got some more great information coming up, but we do have, we have a question in the chat box that says, Ron discussed the importance of being strategic. It says, it may be a good idea to have Colleen tell us the difference between managing and governing boards.
Sure. So, you know, Ron talked about being strategic, and in a governing board setting, there is a difference between governing and managing. And in the governance board, obviously, you know, that's more of an oversight board, but they also do a lot of dreaming, and they do a lot of thinking about what could be the future for that organization. And I think that that's the real strategic area there, of giving that information back to the executive director to put together a plan based on the goals that they want the executive director to accomplish. But if we don't have that, what they call it in governance is gosh, I'm just blanking out. It's generative thinking is what they call it. And it is strategic thinking in a lot of ways of what could we be working on, what kind of programs, what kind of things could we be doing, and then giving that information back to the executive director so she could take it back to her team and see if that would be a good fit in the strategic plan for the organization. And I think that's where the board really comes into it's so valuable, having all of those different resources, those different strengths, those different inputs, so that the executive director can come up with a good plan.
So Terry, I was rudely interrupted by one of my employees, for God's sakes. What was the question was advisory versus governing boards? Is that right? Is that what I heard?
No, we didn't get there yet. That's one of the
Okay.
questions coming up. This one was about the difference between managing boards and policy-based governance boards.
All right. I think Colleen gave a good answer there. I have nothing to add.
Yeah, we actually just did last week. We did a workshop on that.
Perfect.
And, interestingly enough, we had a number of people who had an interest in continuing with that conversation on, and we're going to do a virtual learning group.
Okay.
To work with organizations and these folks to transition from managing to policy-based governance.
Good.
Yes. Okay. So, well, then there you go, Ron. So that was the next question.
Perfect.
Can you speak to us about the difference in board structure between a local 501c3 and a national board? Because I know you've sat on both, like the Red Cross and United Way versus boards. I
have. Now, my contract did say 9 o'clock, so I don't know. I don't know if we need to renegotiate the contract or not. So I tell you what, it's really important that as a board member that you understand the type of board that you're going to serve on. And let me use the Red Cross and the Salvation Army as 2 good examples of that. So I think everybody is comfortable with kind of the boards that you are. We've got a lot of independent 501c3s in Medina County, and clearly that structure is, you've got an executive director, they report to the board, and that team's calling the shots. And it's super important, and that's where I go back to one of my comments around fiduciary responsibility as well, because that's a really, really important responsibility that a board has with an individual 501c3. When you join the board of a Red Cross, Medina Hospital is a good example too. So let me go with Medina Hospital. So I was on the board of Medina Hospital when we made the decision to partner with the Cleveland Clinic. Okay, and when I was on the board of Medina Hospital, we called the shots. We evaluated the CEO. We could fire the CEO. We credentialed the physicians. We had meetings almost every single week, and we were running the hospital. When we transitioned to our partnership with the Cleveland Clinic, we still have a board, and it's advisory, which is kind of like how Red Cross and Salvation Army is. And advisory boards are really important because they do provide a local connection to the organization. And if you've got the right organization, they will allow you to have influence over decisions. day, it's the mothership's call, right? They're going to do, they're going to listen, they're going to do what they want to do. I've seen advisory board members in those organizations get super frustrated because the advisory board member will say, well, they don't care, they don't listen, they do care, they do listen. But at the end of the day, they're going to make a decision that they think is right for the organization. And I've got to be okay with that, right? I've got to be okay with, they gave me a chance to speak. They gave me a chance to voice my opinion. They've made a different decision. I don't have any control over that decision. And let's lock arms and let's move forward.